This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello. I am your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome once again, I hope, to the Spirit and Wellness Show. If this is your not your first time listening, and if it is your first time listening, then welcome. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, happenings in the world of politics, happenings in the world of international relations, environment, technology, everything that we hear about throughout the course of our week, and we take a look at it, and we take a look at it from a higher perspective. And some days, finding that higher perspective is a little harder than others. And this happens to be one of those days. I had a lot planned to talk about, and hopefully I will get to those things. We've been having an interesting kind of examination of health and health care and the effect of the mind on health, and want to continue with that discussion, but because this is a current events, I can hardly turn away from the events going on, or that went on last night and are in some sense still going on in Charlottesville, Virginia. This is one of those events that galvanizes, infuriates, and enlightens all at the same time. And if you don't know what I mean, yesterday in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is about, I'd say about an hour away from where I am right now, there was a planned rally of white supremacist organizations, including the Ku Klux Klan and other organizations. They marched waving Nazi flags for some reason, right next to Confederate flags. They spouted, hateful racial slurs. David Duke, the former head of the Ku Klux Klan, spoke about how they were going to complete President Trump's mission to take back America. And ultimately, there was violence, as these things are wont to happen. There were anti-protesters to these white supremacist marchers and protesters. And it ended in the deaths of 3 people. Someone drove a car into the crowd killing at least one person, and I'm not exactly sure where the other two deaths came from, if they were part of that or not. The reason why these protests were going on the from the point of view of the white supremacists groups, well, not from their point of view, but this is the reason why they were protesting, was because in Charlottesville, there's been a long tradition of statues, roads, and other memorial type things in honor of Confederate generals, leaders, and so forth. And over the last period of months, Charlottesville, having taken it to a vote and having the mayor of Charlottesville make these decisions, they decided to remove or change the names of buildings, streets, statues, commemorations of the Confederacy. A shameful time for many in this country's history, and one that in cities across the country people have finally awoken to their disturbing nature and are wanting to make sure that this shameful period of history is not glorified by glorifying the leaders of those who wish to oppress a group of people, those who fought against this country. And these groups have been protesting for, the same period of time, but this protest on Saturday was the biggest of them all. And, of course, because of the volatility of it, it garnered national attention. And so now the world's attention, actually more than national, I think the world's attention is on Charlottesville and the incidents that have happened. These young white men protesting the removal of their Confederate, I'm assuming that their ancestors were Confederate soldiers or whatnot. They marched, as I said, they yelled racial epithets. They carried tiki torches. All of which they have a constitutional right to do. As much as it may be disturbing to many of us, it is their right in this country, which their ancestors, fought against, but okay, to march and to make any statements that they want. It is not their right to deploy chemical agents, which they did. Engage in street fighting, which they did. Were engaged in nonviolent protests or counter-protests to their protest. And it is not their right to drive a car at high speed through a crowd of anti-racist activists. And if you see the video, which you probably have already seen if you've turned on the news at all, it looks like a war zone. As I said, it's not very far from where I'm speaking to you today. And these are the times, as I say, when it is sometimes harder than other days to hold the higher perspective. When confronted with an energy that comes out of pure or the lowest perspective that we can hold as human beings, the perspective of separation. So those of you who've listened to the show before know what I mean when I talk about approaching things or looking at news stories from a higher perspective. The perspective I'm coming from is a metaphysical perspective. Basically, that says that we create the circumstances around us on a higher level because we, as beings, exist on a higher level. This physical, mundane existence is just an illusion or creation of our most highest selves. And that we create those situations, these stories, these interactions, our world, basically, in order for us to have these experiences. And we come from a higher perspective when we remember that, when we reconnect with our higher selves, and we are able to take a look at what's going on in our lives as part and parcel of this sort of creative process, which we are always engaged in. And as I've said, at times it's harder, particularly when sort of the buttons being pushed are closer to home. But it is important to remember that we are creating these things, and we're creating them to have experiences that, at the highest part of ourselves, that level where we are all connected, that level of oneness from which all of this emanates, we create these things to experience that which we don't experience in that oneness state. And we have those kinds of experiences, or we seek out those kinds of experiences that are really not us, just in the same way as we might, at this level, the mundane level, seek out a book or a movie and get involved in that to have experiences that we wouldn't normally have in our everyday lives. Well, this is sort of a higher or more cosmic or metaphysical version of that. And so because we are not hate, because we are not violence, because we cannot be killed or destroyed or even hurt, although the bodies with which we move around in this game and can